Welcome back. I am John P. Today we're going to be talking about 4 watch brands that collectors have finally caught on to. This is going to be 4 watch brands that I'm very excited to talk about here today because I've talked about them in the past on how they are such great values in the past. Now, I still think that they're pretty good deals for the type of horological value that they offer, but they are being caught on to by collectors and for the right reasons. I'm going to share with you some of these reasons that I've been noticing by working with so many of you out there, not only on YouTube in the comments section, but also on my Instagram, The Real John P, and my TikTok, The Real John P, as well as DelReyWatch.com, where we buy, sell, and trade watches and work with so many of you out there, not only on these brands, but so many others out there, and we keep different wish lists oftentimes for certain people that are looking for things, and these watch brands are on quite on a trajectory of the up and up, and people want to put them in their collections. So stick with me here, and we're going to be talking about these brands. Now, on the wrist today, I have a Rolex 1016 Explorer, vintage from 1972 with the frog foot dial. Very cool. You can see more about this on my Instagram, The Real John P. So the first watch brand that collectors have finally caught on to, and I'm very excited to really be talking about this, is Daniel Roth. Now, some of you out there are going to know about Daniel Roth because he is truly an icon in terms of being a watchmaker. Now, the Daniel Roth brand was acquired by Bulgari along with, of course, the Gerald Genta brand, and every so often you'll see Bulgari release a watch from either of these brands, which today do share a workshop, and they also draw some design and styling cues from not only the Daniel Roth brand, but as well the, of course, the Gerald Genta brand, and they'll bring it into some of the Bulgari lines. And so that's very cool and interesting to see. There's probably some type of play involved, actually, being able to use their workshops and maybe some of the people that were working on those watches. But nonetheless, the Daniel Roth watch brand is just so cool. And we've had a bunch of them at Del Rey Watch a few years ago. And when we first got them in, it was a little bit slow, but then all of a sudden, as the market crept up out there, before we had a bit of a pullback in terms of pricing, collectors just started eating them up because of the value. The quality is so high for the price point of watch that you're getting from, what was an independent brand, oftentimes using El Primero movements if we're talking about the chronographs, and some very other, modified movements. But what really is kind of what the Daniel Roth brand is known for among collectors is just the cool shaped case. I'll put a picture here, but it's a very interesting and unique case that even follows through into the Bulgari brand of today and some of their watches. I think it's really interesting and unique. And when you get the precious metal versions of the watches, they really are quite far beyond what you're paying, where you would have to get from another brand at several times the price point. So Daniel Roth collectors are finally starting to catch on. I am very excited to see this. Now, another independent that collectors have caught on to is Alain Silberstein. Now, if you've been a watch collector recently, and maybe you've gotten into it recently, you really probably have seen that Alain Silberstein did some collaborations with MB&F, the very high-end independent manufacturer that makes kind of complicated architectural works of art inside of a watch type watches. These are very interesting avant-garde watches, as well as Louis Erard did an Alain Silberstein collaboration using the playful colorways that he's known for and the squiggly lines of the seconds hand that's in many of his watches. Now, Alain Silberstein, the company, did go under. They stopped producing watches under their own name, many years ago, and these watches for 5 years, basically up until the last year of me sharing these videos with you, were some of the best bang for buck watches and unique and interesting watches that you can find on the market, and no one was buying them. There's a couple of reasons, but it was very niche. The design and styling cue was a little bit youthful and playful. Not everyone is into that. And also a lot of his watches did feature, imagery from very specific niche, either, cultural backgrounds or other types of things and holidays that maybe were not appealing to everyone, right? Like he'd have a Christmas watch and he'd have, a watch, for, Jewish holidays. And he'd have all these interesting watches that are very awesome, but it might just not be like a number one choice for someone to, as an everyday wear, because it's a very niche certain time of year watch. I digress. But nonetheless, he makes very cool watches, and watch collectors have started buying them up. I see more of these watches being posted online on places like Instagram, and I also see the online market still kind of held up in terms of pricing, whereas some other brands have pulled back. Alain Silberstein hasn't dropped that much in this recent market pullback, so I do think that Alain Silberstein watches will become more collectible in the future based on these trends. And also, I will say I really do like these watches. Any Alain Silberstein lovers, leave that in the comments below. Love to see it and hear it. Now, next, we have IWC, International Watch Company. Now, IWC has gone through some phases, right? IWC currently is owned by none other than the Richemont Group, which owns so many watch brands out there, including Panerai and many others. And so because of this, the watch brand, of course, has gone through some changes. Now, the watch brand did start originally producing, military and pilot watches, starting in the early 1900s or really the late 1800s by an American that built the watch company in Europe, and they produced contract manufacturer watches for quite a long period of time through the world wars. And then taking us in today, the early 2000s, you had the pilot watches were just so, famous out there. Celebrities were wearing them. The big pilot, the large kind of aviation pilot watch. So many people were wearing this watch. And then you had a period where, the Richemont brands did get dumped on the market. And because of that, the IWC brand, unfortunately, did become a little bit tainted out there on the market, and the prices secondhand did drop. Now, IWC in the last few years has done some really phenomenal things to not only draw from their heritage and some vintage-inspired watches to kind of captivate collectors, but they've also improved, in my opinion, the quality on so many of their watches. I had the Portuguese chronograph, the green dial, that I thought the case construction quality was on point, if not better than most things in the price segment of watch we're talking about. We're talking about a $7,000 retail price point column wheel chronograph, which I think is fair retail price, but you can get them, the older ones at least, out on the market now, maybe $4,000. So I think that's just a phenomenal deal. And even outside of these watches, some of the more interesting watches from the late 90s and early 2000s, watch collectors have started adding to their collection as something just a little bit unique and different, right? I was at a party recently, a certain event, and I bumped into a watch collector, and they put an IWC, one of the older Portofino's perpetual calendar, I believe he had, or maybe it was something very similar. But he had this in his collection. He was so excited to be this IWC collector, and that's not something that I would see outside of the big pilots, 4 or 5 years ago. So I think collectors are catching on to IWC, and I do think they deserve it, because I do think that they've really managed to come back from that period of overexposure on their inventory. IWC watches, I think, are here to stay. Now, last, we're talking a holy trinity watch brand. This is going to be Vacheron Constantin. Yes, many people consider the Vacherons, such as the Overseas, to be an alternative to something else, right? Oh, the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak is too expensive. Perhaps I will get the Vacheron Overseas. Not everyone, but that is sometimes the train of thought on some of the Vacheron watches. Though, when people think of dress watches, and a large portion of the Vacheron catalog has historically been dress watches or dressier watches, people have kind of gravitated towards Patek Philippe. But with Patek Philippe being more desirable and then limiting the supply of the watches out there, and really Patek kind of crossing over into mainstream outside of the watch collecting community. And, Patek Philippe has also become more popular with celebrities and musicians and the like. So you did have a lot of trickle over into Vacheron, but with the recent market pullback, you see some much better pricing, in my opinion, much lower pricing than we saw the last 2 years. But what you do see is kind of maybe a price floor that's been reached, and more collectors are still seemingly buying the Vacheron watches, even outside of the Overseas, right? I did a video where I talk about Luke Bryan, a country singer, had some Vacheron watches, including, a double retrograde watch in his collection, and that might not be something you would have saw, or something that you would have seen, 5 years ago to see, someone kind of in that type of circle putting a Vacheron in their collection. I think that's awesome to see, but also I'm just seeing more people add it to their watch collection once again, and maybe it could be, tied to people getting back into dress watches. I hope, because I do like dress watches, but for whatever reason, I see more collectors really looking at Vacheron, and it makes sense because the quality is there. The pricing, I think, is very right now compared to Patek Philippe, which still is selling, of course, above Vacheron at quality that, in my opinion, oftentimes is negligible. Not pinpointing or comparing two specific references, but it's there. It's in that range. It makes sense, and I think Vacheron is a great, phenomenal, holy trinity, old world brand for someone looking for something different. So what do you guys think about these 4 watch brands that, at least in my opinion, and what I'm seeing collectors are starting to put in their collection a whole lot more? Are you one of these collectors that's doing so, or maybe you're not? I'd love to see it and hear it in the comments below. Guys, also please do not forget to thumbs up, like, and subscribe. I do appreciate it. You can find me on Instagram, TheRealJohnP, TikTok, TheRealJohnP, and please do not forget to check out delraywatch.com, where we may have some of these watches, but if not, we certainly have so many of other watches for you to enjoy, buy, sell, and trade. Thanks, guys. You've been chatting with John P.